We are lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Carell, and I'm here with my buddy Ed and podcast partner extraordinaire, Jan Jeremias. So it might just be the two of us here today, and we're willing to take a moment or two and maybe share some thoughts that might not have gotten shared otherwise. And I think, Jan was mentioning something to me before we came on about the hectic pace of just being busy uh, for the last few months, and I think I can definitely agree and concur. I've shared the same kind of feeling, and the other part of it is that there's some things that have been at the top of my list for such a long time now, and we're not done. We're not close to having them pay off, and at the same time, it's requiring more energy, not less. So, with that in mind, I've been spending extra time considering the notion of mindfulness and taking the whole inside outside approach to everything that I do, including writing emails, including taking a moment or two of just closing my eyes and listening. And what I'm finding in the past week or so is that doing that is kind of changing my perspective on how hectic and how incomplete it feels. And you know that notion of incompleteness, Jan, where always in the middle of something. I think I mentioned this last week in the podcast that I love mowing the lawn because I can start it, I got a middle, it's done, and then I can stand back afterwards with whatever is all over me, including dust, and just kind of appreciate my work. That's a
Mhm.
rare experience for me in all of the consulting and business stuff that I do. How about you?
I mean, I agree. I think that very few things in our life do we finish to completion. Um, and I think historically we've become a society of multitasking or multi-focusing. Let's just say that. Because I'm guilty of this too, of how often am I on a meeting and actually looking at my phone at the same time. So I'm basically half focused, like or a quarter focused or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's this um there's this drive, especially in our world, to distraction, basically, where we're distracted almost all the time and we're not really present in almost anything we do.
It's an interesting thing to step back and take a look at. It's always been in Western philosophy, do what you can on as many different things as possible, and sooner or later, really good ones will get done. Now, having said that, I had a boss that said there's two ways to do a job. One is fast, and the other one is half fast. So when you think about the whole idea of kaizen and the focus of removing things from the process and the flow, the main leap forward, I would say, in manufacturing in the last 50 years, and it's also a really good thing to kind of make your life uh, kind of a model or a metaphor for this whole notion of just in time, and also the whole notion of the single most efficient and best unit in manufacturing is one. As soon as you start having more than one, you have a distraction. You also have the space getting filled up. And there was a man named Oliver White, and what his tenet was is that inventory will expand to fill the space available. The same is true with thoughts. The same is true with tasks. And one of the things that people who I've observed that are really good at executing well and doing great work, as opposed to getting a lot of things done, are those folks that can start and finish a task one end to the other and be done with it, and it's complete. And the quality of it therefore is really, really high, as opposed to being distracted by many things at the same time. So the notion of being a multitasking, multi-focusing, also it tends to lead to personal disintegration, if you know what I mean. That your thinking is now spread over so many different things or so many different possibilities, and also avoiding thinking about all of those things and possibilities to the extent that it really becomes kind of a overbearing thing for you to have in mind. um, I don't know. It creates stress. It creates, again, in many instances, it creates mess. Remember that movie, A Beautiful Mind?
Mhm.
This man who was on to something really big. So he wrote gibberish on all of these notes and put them on the wall, and they were all over the place and everywhere. And the practice of capturing his thoughts was so important to him that the thoughts didn't have to lead to anything, and they really didn't mean anything, but to him they were the most important thing in the world. And I wonder,
I mean, I think I mean, I've always heard people say, and I think I somewhat agree, that women are really great multitaskers because if you look at historically, they had to take care of house, they had to take care of kids, and maybe in hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, they might have actually, done some sort of work, whether that be farming or sewing or something else on the side. And so they tended to be really good or really natural multitaskers in the fact that, they could cook and hold a baby at the same time and nurse, the kind of thing if they needed to.
right?
But in a world where there's so many distractions nowadays and not healthy distractions, from and really what I'm thinking about is the distractions of, like you said, stress, anxiety, and fear, which all are, yes, they're not really tasks, but they're emotional distractions, which can pull us away from what we're doing. So even when we're doing something, we're really thinking and feeling something else,
Yeah, and not present to anything.
not present to anything. Um, and I'm not saying you shouldn't feel like that if that's the way you feel, because I know how much energy it takes for us to kind of push our emotions away, and say, okay, well, I'm not going to feel that way. You know, really? You can tell yourself that and you can try to push it away, but it's very energetically draining to keep it at bay all the time and not even possible.
Yeah, that there's an old saying also that what you resist persists. So
That's right.
that thing that you say that you're attempting to avoid, you're doing other things, and in many cases you're doing things that don't matter, just to say I'm too busy to think about this thing that I don't want to think about, while you're thinking about it and thinking about not thinking about it. So it's kind of a convoluted game that human beings will play with each other and with themselves. The each other being, when they're in the presence of other human beings, they show up as being busy all the time. I'm just so busy, you know what I mean? And how busy are you really? And I I have a it's silly the way some things get simplified. So for example, one of the courses that I'm doing right now, it has this thing where it says, write down all the thoughts you've had today since you got up. My answer to that is okay, now what? If we're going to have 80 or 90,000 thoughts a day, it's kind of a ridiculous thing to isolate a few things, write them down, and say that's what you've thought about. That's called when you ask a human being a question, they will give you an answer 9 out of 10 times. They may not even have ever thought about it before, but they will almost always have an answer to a specific question, especially if the question begins with why. Social norms. What do people expect us to do? Say, I haven't done a flipping thing all day and I'm just having the best day ever. When was the last time you heard anybody say that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person sometimes, and their attitude about what they do or their attitude about life. Yeah. I mean, I've been like you said, we were on early a few minutes earlier and was talking about how busy I've been and how sort of focused on all these, but really good focused or creative in so many different ways lately.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, and I am enjoying everything I'm doing. So I'm really excited by what things I'm creating in the programs or whatever, or the workshops I have people in. But that does not mean that it isn't that that creativity requires some sort of downtime and reflection. There does need to be some time where your mind just says, okay, I need to rest right now. I don't really need, I don't want to create. And when you're on a creative flow, sometimes that's hard because the ideas are coming in and the excitement's coming in, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's great. I could do that. And you kind of go with it. But there's a point where you just have to step back and say, okay, like as little thought as I can.
Yeah, and along with that, what I notice is that we're prone in our culture to say busy as opposed to active or engaged
Well, that's
or
because our society measures busy, like productivity as being busy or success as being busy.
and yet the antithesis of that is busy work, right? So
Exactly.
funny thing
Absolutely.
about that, yeah, we have different code words for different types of emotional attachment. And when you consider for a moment that the notion of I'd rather hear from somebody. I've had the most productive week I've ever had. And guess what? I notice I'm engaged about a third of the time and I'm spending, 2/3 of the time thinking about what I'm going to do and really applying myself so that when I hit the ground, I'm running full speed and I can adjust very quickly because I've planned for interruptions and things that don't go well. But I mean, if there's another way, are you familiar with the term fogging?
No, I don't think so.
So when it's almost like a psychological term that basically uh, offers a defensive block to a topic that you don't want to really embrace or talk about. And so, for example, the Brits do it this way. If you say to them, "It looks to me like you've got your hands full and don't really have time for anything else," the answer might be, "Right, Bill,"
Hmm.
or "What do you think about how things are going over in the islands?" It's a good question. So another method of fogging is to turn around and ask a question back. And so, for instance, if you say to me, "Bill, what do you think about doing podcasts?" So you say that to me.
Bill, what do you think about doing podcasts?
Right, Jan. What do you think about doing podcasts? The reflective, it's like get it out of my space as quickly as possible with no additional work or effort. And all of that is because it's an interruption to the thoughts I was having before I got asked the questions, most of which are either about the future or the past. Very little of it is like me sitting here going, I kind of like what this place smells like right now, you know?
Mhm.
It's got this sort of a fall feel to it. It's got, kind of a, you know, I don't really know how to put my finger on it, but right after a rain, when everything is crisp and clear, and like an air cleaner couldn't even have the air smell this great. The little things, the fundamentals.
The basics that are really not the basics, you know?
Yeah, it requires a new set of training and new, triggers and reminders that, oh my goodness, it's been almost 15 minutes and I have spent no practice at all in the mindful arena.
It was interesting because I was on a LinkedIn audio event on Saturday that I get on every week, and we were talking about it came up in the conversation about a space of time where your mind really has, like, no thought, and I find it's the one thing about, like, practicing, whether it be meditation or mindfulness or just, for me, I don't even call it meditation, I just call it getting quiet, you
Right.
know, and how I can get there so much quicker now. Where we're literally, I will have, like, there's just space, like, no thought. And maybe it's not constant, but there are moments where I feel like there's just absolutely no thought. And I'm like, I love it here. Like, it does feel like your brain does get a rest. And maybe that's why I've been able to work as much as I've been working, because I can tap into those moments quite quickly now. And so I drop in really fast at points where I'm like, okay, I can get into a moment right now for a few minutes where I'm literally thinking of absolutely nothing, which, and I remember one of the stupidest things anybody ever said to me. It was my first meditation class. And go in, and the guy says, okay, whatever, gives his little spiel at the beginning. And he says, just don't think. And I remember thinking to myself, what the freak does that mean? Like, I remember going in thinking to myself, like, how do you not think? Like, it was so, it just seemed so, and not to say that, yes, it's just, my friend used to always say mindfulness or meditation is your brain on Sunday traffic versus your brain on, like, rush hour traffic, which was just this beautiful image for me, where there was, like, space between the thoughts. So it was just a lot less thoughts as
Yeah.
opposed to having, our mind, which, how many thoughts can we have in a minute?
Yeah. The work that I've been doing for the last couple of weeks is quite, where meditation and mindfulness are at two completely different levels, where meditation is a combination of breathing exercises and clearing a space with the intention of staying in that space, and the focus being on that space, if you will.
Mhm.
Where mindfulness is just the opposite. It's being in a quiet state, but not in that deep, kind of concentration that you might find yourself while you're meditating. It's more about like being open to listening to the sounds around you, smelling the smells, tasting the tastes, breathing in and breathing out, and just feeling the different feelings in your body, and being aware of that next input, wherever it comes from, external to yourself, and not empowering a long conversation with that voice in your head. You take a break from that, and put all of your perspective and concentration on what's going on around, and what's coming in, and where do I feel it, and oh, that's a little thing going on in my big toe, and it's kind of like, oh, aha, noticing this, noticing that, as opposed to doing something that creates. And my other third way of being is in the state of asking an internal question. And that's the focusing method, which I find to be very wonderful in terms of allowing a thought focus to an answer, and not an intellectual answer, but an answer from the body in terms of creating a shift. And the answer comes when the questions start to line up more and more with what the body is actually saying is important, as opposed to what your mind is telling you is important.
Mhm.
Because the mind is usually rehashing some sort of an upset or something that went really well, and not usually anything else other than that. But the upset experience and the sense that it went really well were the body's reaction. You didn't vote on that. Your body just, that's how it responded. And you interpret one as being good and the other one not being so good. But the body is trying to tell you something maybe a little bit different.
Mhm.
So that takes a different kind of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I differentiate it like that, but it doesn't really matter how we label it.
Yeah.
I think of mindfulness as being much more being present in whatever you're doing. So Thich Nhat Hanh talks about the fact, I remember in his first book that I read by him, which was Miracle of Mindfulness,
Yeah.
which is a pretty old book, and talks about like when I'm washing the dishes, am I really washing the dishes? Or is my mind somewhere else? Or can I feel the water and the suds and the hardness of the plate? So I'm truly participating in whatever I'm doing. When I'm brushing my teeth, am I really brushing my teeth? So it becomes much more of an exercise in being present with something as opposed to doing something by rote and being unconscious when you're doing it. How often do we do something we do all the time and we don't really think about what we're doing? We just do it. And we're not really present in what we're doing. We just do it. And so it kind of brings you in. What you were talking about going into the body, that's a lot of what I talk about and work with my clients. So if somebody has pain, for example, my question to them is like, okay, well, I believe that there's an emotion that's kind of tapped into that. So it's kind of like, what are you feeling? And if you could identify that feeling, where would it be in your body? And how could you kind of create space for it? So, if you're feeling fear or if you're feeling insecure, like where is that and how does it feel? Because I think a lot of times as human beings, words are wonderful, but there is this inability at times for us to express how we're feeling. We can't verbalize it, we can't articulate it so that we can get someone else to understand it. And sometimes we don't even know what it is. But do we really need to label it to be able to process it and let it pass through? We don't really need to label it. We could just sit with it and say, okay, well, I don't need to, maybe it'll come and we'll eventually figure out what it was. But in the beginning, I'm like sitting there going, okay, well, I don't know, but I just feel off. Like I just don't, it's a good way to put it. I just don't feel up. I'm not feeling down per se, but I'm not quite sure what this is at the moment.
Yeah.
And where is it? Like, is it in my chest? Is it in my stomach? Is it in my back? And could I just kind of sit back and kind of breathe into that area? And even actually, if you can put your hands on it to kind of direct the breath there, it's always a really good sensory exercise. And usually it will come. And I think that when we have something going on physically or emotionally, we need to look to the body.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree with you. And I really think the the neatest part of it is that we were talking about the things that you resist persist. However, once you can fully presence something, it disappears. For example, try to remember something that you've forgotten. It's not possible. So, with that being said, going back to your, don't think, which is essentially a Buddhist koan. Another one might be, don't have the next thought you were going to have. The the neat part of those being the access to dwelling in a question where the goal is not to get an answer, but the goal is to feel something. The goal is to have a non-verbal, like, experience that comes and goes, like you're saying before, that it shows up or and it's presence if present if it is. And the other part of it is that the notion of asking a question for which there is no answer challenges the human brain to a level of dysfunction, because we are not happy campers if we can't get the answer to a question. So there's all of that that comes along with it. So it's a practice that gives experience in an area that most of us never really get a chance to get into.
Hmm. The other thing that when you're talking about we need an answer, and I think the other aspect where it gets to be is one is in response to unknown or change.
Yeah.
I think the same thing happens. There is this feeling of uncertainty, which people have a hard time with. Um, People don't like to think that their life is uncertain, that whatever their surroundings are uncertain. And so that same feeling of not having an answer somewhat ties into, I think, that is this feeling of uncertainty or unpredictability. And I think that's partly why we're in the state in this world that we're in now, where everybody realizes that basically everything is uncertain. The only thing that's certain is that there's going to be uncertainty, like,
And somehow that may be calming for some, but not so much for others, you know?
right, exactly. I'm sorry, but I just got to plug in. Absolutely. I think that it is a very hard place to be, depending on what your history is and what happened to you and all those different things and how you were brought up, all those things kind of play a role. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So we were talking either last time or the time before about one of the authority models where the leader has the answers, and that situation is something that I kind of counted on, in my early manufacturing years when I started to take on more responsibility outside of the supervisory function and more into the, contributing to the direction of the company and where we were going in the future, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And what I found was the more entrepreneurial the company that I got into, because I worked for what was, in essence, a startup company in electronics. And the reason it was a startup company was because it had been purchased by a startup company. So therefore, it caught the startup company, bug in terms of, all of this grandiose thinking and all the rest of it, and nobody's feet actually ever being on the ground. And yeah, we do someday have to make a profit, but we're in the R&D kind of a stage here. And what we all went around for, can you imagine 150 people trying to do a manufacturing facility kind of a job, build electronics, telephone equipment, switches, all of these particles that have to go out into the world and actually work, waiting for people to give enough direction so that we could set a master schedule and know what kinds of switches we would be building and know how many quantities of different types of feature phones we would be building, only to find out there was no one in the building from the CEO on down who ever was interested in answering that question. So I kind of came up with a metaphor of us all swimming in a really large pool in the dark, and everyone trying to check with everyone else to see who was closest to the edge of the pool. So where the safe escape might be. And it communicated. I basically said it out loud at a meeting at one point, and everybody goes, "That's it."
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, I think that that's that when we got off a little bit when you talk about mindfulness or just mindfulness, presence, meditation. And sometimes that's the last place you want to go. I wrote about that this morning on my LinkedIn post. It was says you have to go inside for insight. So inside for insight,
Yeah.
and um, this whole feeling of like sometimes that's the scariest place to go because your thoughts can be really loud and can tell you a lot of different things, a lot of which are not necessarily true, or most of them aren't true.
Yes.
And at times in my life, like the last place I wanted to go was inside because it was either too painful or my thoughts were too scary, like of the like what ifs or whatever. And it's a really kind of, and years ago, realizing one is it's not going to kill you. So you might think it's going to kill you when you're in the muck of feeling like that or you're in the muck of those messy thoughts.
Sure.
But also, there is great power in going there because really, most of the time, we have the answers for ourselves. Like most of the time, we know the answer. We just refuse to see it, or, you know, it's kind of like those signs when you know you're not feeling well and you kind of choose to ignore it. Like we all know. And we're like, oh, well, if I ignore it, it's going to go away. And it's not really like if I concentrate on it, then it's not going to happen.
Well, thank goodness that's the opposite reaction of most surgeons and fighter pilots, and bus drivers. And, when you stop and think about a bus going into a skid, the bus driver's mind clears immediately. And the only thing that's of interest at that point, once the immediate fear is overcome, is what's the next thing coming that I've got to do here in order to survive this.
Hmm.
And that's what you want. People who are highly specialized professionals, they learn how to do that. They call it focusing, and it's a different focusing I was talking about before, but this is like an intense awareness of everything involved, of what is and is not part of the task that you're looking to complete. And you've already been trained to a level where you don't have to think about what the outcome is going to look like. You're generating the activity. You don't care about the outcome right now. You just want to be present. That if you're a surgeon and a vein starts spurting, you know what you got to do with that and what to ask for, and the team around you, and the whole thing is about being 150% mindful in the moment.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, yes, and I agree they are. But I think having been connected with certain people that are in situations like that, there is a price they pay. Um, and and I guess now as I've come, with my kind of world of going into the healing practices, it's like how does someone who's in an extreme situation like that get over basically maybe the trauma or whatever that was? And I've spent a lot of time of late in the world, like in the world, working with people or talking to people in that place. And not that I have any solutions for them except to be present or to be there for them so that they're heard, but which is, I'm not belittling that at all. But um, but there is this feeling of, I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and I was saying, I think one of the hardest places to be um, is wanting to help people and knowing that, it's, or heal them and just knowing, being able to step back and say, I can just be here and be present for somebody. And we talk about presence, and listening, truly listening versus solutions, because I think as human beings we want to give solutions. We want people to feel better, so we want to offer solutions.
Yes. There has to be a cause and an effect everywhere, right?
Everywhere, everywhere.
And if we can be part of the effect, wow, that was pretty cool. We're valid human beings.
Exactly. We're valid human beings. Yeah. If we can, and it really is this drive to alleviate pain. And because, I mean, if you're, most people don't want to, or beings don't want to see another one of their species or even another one of their non species in pain
Yes.
or suffering. And it is this quest that I think we feel like, if you're, to help people to solve their pain, but really, people have to solve their own pain.
Or not.
Or not, right? And that's their, it's really their choice in a lot of ways.
Yeah. The $64,000 question is almost always, what is the access to making a difference? You
Mm,
know, and we talk about levels of mindfulness, but and the folks that are the ability, they become the ability to be 150% mindful in situations, comes from training that allows these competencies to become habit, such that the habits do the directing of the focus as opposed to thoughts. It's the competency, it's the having done this surgery 3,500 times. I got a really smile because my Mohs surgeon, wonderful man, and I think probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I asked him about how many skin cancer surgeries did he believe that he had performed. And he said, it's a funny thing that you ask me that. I've been at this for almost 30 years now, and I believe I've performed about 80,000 skin cancer surgeries. And I said, what's different about them? And he said, really nothing. It really is a combination of two different things: utilizing skill and technique, and also being fully aware and awake. And, never believing that I know more than the science is telling me while I'm doing it. And I said, well, what do you mean by the science? He says, well, I have methods that I can go and measure. For instance, in Mohs, um, it's a very interesting kind of a thing where you can dye tissue and then you can freeze it and slice it really thin and look at under a really high magnification microscope
mhm,
and tell the difference between cancerous and healthy cells. And he said, my early days, I kind of hoped that I was getting it all. And he said, and as I really got better and more understood this technology and what works about it and what needs to be finagled, uh, he said, I that's where I became a better surgeon. The more my tools are working for me as opposed to my not understanding the tools, the more it worked. But can you imagine doing something where you could say I did it 80,000 times and it wasn't just eating a meal or breathing?
yeah, I have a few things in my life maybe I could say that about. One thing, basically. I might have, by thinking, I could tell you probably, let's say I give it take a few times. I'm just going to get out my calculator because I'm curious. Yeah, I mean, I would say I've probably practiced yoga about 5,000 times through the years.
I wouldn't take that bet. I'm pretty sure you have.
So and the nice thing when you were talking about mowing the lawn, that's the gift about coming to your mat, because there's always a beginning, an ending, and a closing. Every single time you get on, there's always that cycle. You begin practice, you go through it, and you end it. And there is a conscious like beginning part to it. Like there's like, okay, I'm getting down, I'm gonna get down on my mat and I'm gonna practice. So there's a conscious awareness of that
Yeah.
versus a lot of other things in my life, like I said, where there doesn't seem to be. And some things are inherent in the fact that, you tweak your business and or you offer a program, it doesn't work, and it could be better, and you kind of learn from that, and then you implement those things, and then so there's always that evolution, but there's always that evolution in everything
Yes.
because we evolve, and if we think they're going to stay stagnant and sedentary, you know, it's not going to happen.
No, while you're talking about that, what I'm kind of noticing is how often do we do a postmortem on anything that we do? You kind of go through the day every single day. If something didn't work, or if something was much more than we expected in a positive way, those things kind of stick out, and we might, take a moment and appreciate them, or rue them, one of the two. But how often do we basically go, where was the lesson? You know, what was the universe teaching me in this moment? And that being open to, it was more than just something that happened. It was a life's lesson potentially. Or let's treat it that way and see how that goes.
Right. I mean, I love that idea of treating it like that. I don't think we often do that. I mean, I think, there are specific points in my life, and usually it was very traumatic and very severe circumstances
Yes.
where I evaluated it because I thought to myself, I can't be going through this suffering for nothing. Like, there has to be a reason why this happened. And I really evaluated and self reflected and went through the whole path of, basically, um, what I want to say is like almost that mode of self-discovery, like that those were those kinds of circumstances where I literally can say I really looked at that and thought to myself, like, what am I supposed to learn from this? Like, what is this supposed to teach me? And it's not very often in an everyday circumstance where I think we do that. I think because we don't realize the effects of our actions necessarily. So I don't think that we go into a conversation and think to ourselves afterwards, like, what am I supposed to learn from that person? Or what am I supposed to learn from that? And maybe I could go into a conversation like that. Like, what am I supposed to learn from this conversation? And what am I supposed to learn from this person?
Well, at one point I was kind of mulling over, that scriptural all things work for good, right? And I thought to myself, in different circumstances, if all things work for good, where's the good that this worked for? Can I notice what that is? Or is it going to be invisible to me for a while until it is visible? And it's an especially trying and tedious question right after something really major has gone wrong, like losing a loved one, or there are circumstances in life that just occur. And if you can train yourself to at least look for where's the good coming from this thing that has happened, sooner or later you're going to get answers to that question. Maybe not right at the beginning, however, but as time goes on and you start to see similar sorts of things occur, and maybe start to see a little bit of a shift in reaction to those things that are occurring, you might be closer to being able to notice and actually identify what the good is. But I don't think so all at once right at the beginning. No, I don't think it is right there.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that sometimes, yes, I'm sure you could learn certain things from, probably maybe every circumstance. But I think that there are certain things that you don't, and then it's the repetition of whatever happened, or something kind of like a little, like a little root off of that original thing which happens, and you're like, and accumulated all like one on top of the other. All of a sudden, you get a picture of like, okay, it's like the things that happen have like happened to you multiple times.
Right.
And then you sit there and say to yourself, okay, this is the, fifth time in my life this has happened, or the 100th time this has happened. Maybe I'm supposed to finally learn something. And not getting attached to whether you do or you don't, because it might be, I always say that, when I got divorced, and I went through this whole thing of like, how could I not see what was happening, And I realized that in the place that I was at that moment, I couldn't see it. Like I couldn't see it. When I looked back and reflected on different things that had happened, I could see like there were signs. But when
Yeah.
I was in the muck of it, I didn't see it. Other people might have seen it. And that's the gift, when we always say that you can, a lot of times it's hard to see our own lives clearly for whatever.
Mostly.
Mostly. Exactly, exactly. That's when you have good friends.
Yeah.
But I think it's true. Like, I think I was looking at it from a perspective of, like, not being in it at that moment 20 years earlier. Like, I was a different person then. So, the person I was then was very different than the person I was now after, 20 years later. Or
Yes.
I hope I'm different, like, I hope I've evolved enough since then.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting to me because um, what I've kind of noticed over the last 25 or 30 years is that the similarity of different events or occurrences isn't what happened, it's my response to what happened.
Mhm, absolutely.
So for some reason, without inquiry, unknown to me, I had a relationship with something about those occurrences that hit me in a very similar way,
Mhm.
in a way that I would say was not going to leave me at my most prime, operating speed, right? So what I started to do was to not kind of get into the good or the bad of the situation, but to really like what's up with my relationship with that? What is in this experience that I relate to it automatically? I mean, it's not I don't vote on it, it's part of my autonomic system. And how is it my reaction to that is so similar and it doesn't seem to have ever progressed, like gotten less, if you will. And so having that question to lean on has been really helpful for me in the last 12 to 14 months. And I didn't really start thinking about my relationship to losing loved ones, for example, and how impactful it was to me. And what I really noticed was I give my heart to everyone that I know. I mean, they don't ask permission and they never get to vote on it. Okay.
Mhm.
I just do that. So it breaks my heart when I go to a restaurant and one of the servers that's been there for a year or two is now gone. I actually grieve. I miss them,
Mhm.
you know? And then the other extreme is where somebody actually crosses over and they're no longer here anymore. And what I found was knowing that if I can be responsible for this is my deal. This is like a habit that I have grown over the years. I now can have a different and yet equally full and rich experience of what's happening without it leaving that aftertaste of loss and
Mhm.
grief, if you will.
Mhm.
And that's improved my quality of life a whole bunch. And it really hasn't come overnight because I've been struggling for 6 months or so,
Mhm.
and and that's what I'm kind of coming up with here. It's the closest thing I can do in terms of languaging it to date. Let's put it that way.
Mhm. I mean, I have this, let's say family situation, which is quite dynamic and hard. And I used to always say that, it used to be I would have an encounter with these family members and literally I would go into a depression for like a month. I mean, I would go and I would just be weepy and I would just, and it has got, and I'm gonna say it, like, it got at one point or another, I was just like, well, I'm not gonna have, like, I'm gonna totally disconnect from those people because every time I'm with them, I totally break down for like a month and I
Yes.
don't want to go through that. And it was come like almost like, I don't want to say, and I went to a therapist. I mean, I've been to therapists about it or whatever through the years. I'm not, but it was almost to the effect where like, I can't handle this. And so I'm just going to, for now, I'm going to distance myself. And I know that's not the solution, but it's too painful to go through.
Right.
And then it got to the point where I could notice it, like when I finally started to come back and have a relationship with them, or actually, let's say be in the same room or speaking terms with them or whatever, where I would just sit there and say, instead of a month, maybe it would last 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever. And um, a month ago something happened, and literally it was like this feeling of like I got upset for a second and then it was gone, like literally it was like gone, and I was like, hey, it was like pat myself on the back, kind of thing. But for me it was really looking at the situation, and I'm not saying that I'm blameless, but realizing so much of what was going on is not about me, it's about them. It's about their it's things that they're like, their fear coming into the picture in the relationship, and things that they're like really afraid of in the world. And that has really nothing to do with me per se. And
Yeah.
so it was just like distancing myself and not taking, like, it's not, I'm not to blame. It's not my fault. Um, and like I said, and I'm not blameless. I mean, I realized that I was somewhat shut off and not accepting. So I had to own that too. I had to take responsibility for my part, but realizing that relationships are two ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of this, it's a work in progress, even into this conversation, I can tell. And that's cool because while you're working at it, um, there's no loss of power. If you were just at the mercy of it, with like, what the hell just happened to me? The way it occurred so many times, like if you're going to lose a month and be depressed and weepy, you don't have that kind of time to give, you know?
That's right. Exactly. I'm too busy.
But
I have too much.
if you
I have
were
too
able to
much
turn it around,
in the world.
right? If you were able to turn it around, like you're doing Sudoku or Sudoku, whatever is, however, I don't do it. So if you were doing a crossword puzzle or trying to resolve a chess match or something of that nature, while you're in the middle of it, where you can actually stand back from it and go, let's see if I can at least identify some of the dynamics that are happening here. Like, what's up with this? What's up with that? And what's up with me? You know?
Mhm.
So how you come back to a rational conclusion may be fleeting. It may
Right.
be you go back to it and you go, I'm having that feeling again. Now, how did I resolve this the other day? I don't remember.
That's right. That's right. It's almost like in yoga, we used to say that we're reminded, like we relearn who we are. And that's what life experiences are. And that's what I feel like a lot of the time. Like you have a life experience, you've learned or whatever. And then it happens again in a different scenario, or it happens again. And you're like, what did I do again? What helped last time? And maybe it takes a moment and whatever, and then all of a sudden maybe it comes to you again, and hopefully it becomes familiar to you, so you're
Yes.
like, okay. And I think, to what you said earlier, Bill, that beautiful story about like you connect with people and to you it's a heart connection, so you feel that loss is, I think, realizing something like that about ourselves, whatever it is is very healing in itself, because then I think it explains a lot about ourselves to us. Like sometimes we don't actually understand it, like I was talking about, like we can't put it into words, and we might feel something really strongly, but we don't know how to, like, we're not really sure what's going on. We just know that we're like that. And not that we have to analyze it, but I think when we do see those attributes, when we do go and get sad, it's kind of like we get it. We're like, well, I know why I'm upset about that because I connect with people really strongly. And
Yeah.
that's why. And it just makes you feel like, okay, this is my norm. Like, this is who I am. And so I don't question who I am. And I don't try to be different than who I am. I just
Yes.
know that's who I am.
And then there's the the physics equation for each action. There's an equal and opposite reaction, and to the
Mhm.
degree that you have loved, you can also experience loss and grief. So the more the delta between the top and the bottom of that is, the more that it can be disruptive to your life, until you realize that this is something to be jubilant and joyous about, that you were able to express love to that degree, to feel it this deeply. And in the moment, that might bring just a little bit of solace, that might be just a little bit of, yeah, no, I wouldn't trade that relationship for all the money in the world. It just wouldn't do it, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, and I think that depends on, and you could take that to any characteristic that you have. Like, you know, I've been told for years that I'm too sensitive. Well, yeah, on that, I'm also extremely feeling giving, and my goal, to help people. So, and be able to understand their pain. So, I mean, you know, you have to look at the positive to being that also, is the fact that, yeah, you connect and you have that loss, but yeah, but people are lucky enough to have, you. So,
And the neat part of it is in the universe, there are no positives and negatives. That takes you and me to
that's
identify and label those.
right. That's
The,
right. That's right.
the stuff we like and we're proud of, that's good. The stuff that's, well, maybe not so much, that's bad. And the neat part of all of it is that in a fully functioning human being, in a 24 or 48-hour period, all of those things are not only possible, they actually happen. And with that said, the question is, did you learn anything from that?
Right. Right. It's
Either way.
either way. I mean, it's just, I think it really is interesting, right? That we as human beings, we have to, we usually have to label or digest, like literally, like tweak it, like delve into everything. That
Yep.
inquisitive kind of quest where we have to label things. It's like when I was having this conversation the other day with someone about like some of the healing practices I do, and I said the scientist in me wants to be able to explain it all, and then the healer in me sits back and says, I don't need to understand everything. Like, and I probably, because so much of the universe I can't explain scientifically.
Well, there's that, and then there's the absolute despair that's involved with trying to generate the language to explain the unexplainable, you know?
Right. Yeah, which is what I was talking about before, about words, like the fact that, when people used to always ask me about yoga, it was always so hard for me to explain because so much of what I experience, I can't put into words. And I've gotten better
Yes.
at putting into words now. I do a lot of writing, but some of it is really hard to articulate.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't think, breathe through your eyelids,
Right, right,
you
right, right,
know?
right.
All these
Exactly.
things that we've been told.
Right. And I think it's always so funny that and then we wonder why people don't understand. Well, because it's hard to articulate, it's hard to explain. Some of it is experiential. You have to experience it. And then you get it. It's like, oh, okay,
Yes.
now I get it. Because I had a feeling, I had a sensation, like, there was that sort of tactile physiological response that happened within me. So I get it. But sometimes words cannot explain because words are too limiting.
Well, well, yes. And the experience is what life is. The story of what life is not life. So
Right.
so that you get something intellectually and you can explain it in detail, and the steps of it and how it feels to people and what people have basically said. If you haven't lived it yourself, you don't understand.
I always say it's the difference between reading a recipe, a food recipe online, and actually making it and tasting it. It's like there is that whole idea is you can look at something and even think to yourself, I know what this is going to taste like, but there's nothing like the experience of actually eating it. uh, because you taste it, you feel the texture, like you have all the senses involved. How does it feel? How does it taste? How do all those things come into play?
Yeah, in theory, but once you put it into practice, I'll give you a perfect example of that. I posted a meme about, I think it said, nothing is better without bacon. Oh no,
Uh,
nothing is better. Yeah, nothing is better. No, nothing is better than bacon. Nothing's better without bacon. Nothing's better. So the whole point was, no, I'm doing nothing and bacon is really good, or something of that nature. And then a friend of mine who happens to be very fixated on pickles, her Facebook name is Jasmine Pickle Queen, and so whenever I post the food, she'll say, "Well, where's the pickles, Bill?"
mhm.
Or Mr. C or Dad or whatever she calls me, and then so then I said, "Well, yeah, how about pickles and bacon? And what about chocolate? What about bacon, chocolate, and pickles?" And we all got real excited about that whole notion. And I have a friend who is a chocolatier, and he also does all sorts of food preparation for weddings and bar mitzvahs and all that sort of thing. So I turned him loose on it, and he said he tried dill pickles with bacon and with dark chocolate, semi-sweet chocolate, and he didn't like it, so he tried bread and butter pickles. And so I got all these from him, and we made it up, and there's like a pound of this confection, right? I've yet to find anybody who can even stomach putting it in their mouth and chewing it and swallowing
Right. Well, it doesn't sound very appetizing. Well, let
it.
alone the fact I'm
It's
almost a
like
vegan.
so,
So,
like
I
so
mean,
many
bacon
other
doesn't really appeal
things.
to me anyway.
Looking
But
forward to your first kiss, your first date, your first whatever, okay? And damn, that wasn't it.
no, no, I don't think so. But there is something to say about what I was saying about having that experiential, you know,
Yeah,
whether it's good or bad, like, like that is that, it sounds pretty bad. I guess if you experienced it, it might be pretty bad on a different level.
as far as I'm concerned, we had a hypothesis. I paid a man to make me this confection, and I've yet to find a single human being who thinks it's good. So
Okay.
there's that. And he
There is
sent me a text. He sent me a text the other day. He said, "Well, how do people like it?" And I said, um, "We're old friends. They don't." I said, "I sent you on on a chase that we never caught the rabbit." Okay,
that. Mhm.
but anyway,
That's
the
hysterical.
whole, yeah, living is about having the experience in your body and not the image in your mind. And kind of with that said, do you have any parting thoughts for our folks at home?
Um, if I think people, for all you out there who think meditation is really scary, or undoable, um, just see if you can get quiet maybe a few minutes a day. And not a long period of time. Just see if you can create a little space for yourself somewhere. Get creative if you have to. I remember I used to practice meditation commuting on a bus to Manhattan every day because I had a lot of time and I was just sitting there anyway. And I was like, okay, I can meditate here. I just started meditating. And so if you need to get creative and carpool lines, if you have a moment, just take a few moments to, connecting with your breath, meaning follow your breath. Just notice your inhale and your exhale and just see if it can shift you in some way.
Yes. Yes. One of those other really powerful expressions that I heard about meditating was close your eyes, breathe in, breathe out, and count your breaths
Mhm.
to a billion.
Do a billion, right, really useful. Do a billion. Yeah, I, was talking about that the other day to somebody. Somebody asked me what I do, like, how do I, how do you start and, like, getting space in the thoughts or not thinking, and I'm like, "Oh, my breath is always what I go back to
Right.
because I do my mind does wander, and I go to things, like my to-do list or, something else that happened, either past or future, or is gonna happen, and I'm just like, "Just go back to your breath. Just concentrate on breathing in and breathing out."
That works really well when you're listening to people too, by the way.
Mhm.
Give yourself
Absolutely.
permission to notice that you're not paying attention and then come back and pay attention quietly.
Quietly or just yeah, I've been talking a lot about cultivating the art of listening.
Yeah.
That's been a real focus of mine lately, and just that feeling of going back to my breath. So I'm not checking my phone and I'm not getting distracted. Just,
Sure.
just listen and listen to the person's voice, match it with your breath, whatever you can do to stay present.
Excellent words of advice.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
Beautiful. And there we are. We've had another fine conversation. And before I kiss you all goodbye and tell you I love you, I want you to know that there's someone out there that you know that would make the world a difference to for you to send a text, an email, or possibly give a telephone call to, and just let them know that you appreciate and love them and that your world works because they're part of it. Would you do that for me? Good. That said, I do love you and I wish you a world that works. We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Bye for now.
Bye bye. Physical aspect or
Yeah.
one aspect, but I don't think they're getting in 2 weeks.
I absolutely love what you're saying. And Ken, here's another model that's more like what I'm talking about for the future that would be better for more kids over a lifetime if it were less about how quickly we put them through a process and we're done with them one way or the other. Do you know, in the UK, I had some friends when I was a machinist. In the UK, you go through an apprentice program that's going to take 5 years. It's going to take a maximum of 5 years, could be a minimum of three, but it's going to take somewhere on average around 5 years. And before you can do anything with any type of machinery, like a lathe, a Bridgeport, or anything to cut metal with, you have to take a file, and then you have to take a piece of metal, a piece of steel, and you have to be able to file that over a period of a length to where it's coplanar and flat enough that you can run a dial indicator across it, and you don't get a fluctuation of more than 5 to 10 thousandths. That's really clear at the beginning to tell somebody this is how you get moved on to being, a mechanic apprentice to a first step to a first class or a third class, second class, first class. And when you're done with all of this, you're going to be making full union scale, which might be $50,000, $60,000 a year. But while you're learning how to file, you're going to be paid minimum wage. And so the impetus that went along with that training was you got faster because there was a financial incentive to do so in many cases. And then people would do extraordinary things like find out what are the techniques that I'm going to know after I've done this for a while, like cheat and go and ask, is there a way to do this quicker than just doing it over and over again until it finally one works? And those are the people that usually ended up being machinists for the rest of their lives. The ones that had a real inquisitive nature to them, like, okay, I get it. I get what the goal is, but I also know that there's probably some smart ways to do this, maybe not so smart. And I have a feeling that type of learning approach with kids, and again, back to the martial arts, when we did things together, we would naturally group up into groups of three, either we were interested in mastering the same skills, whatever pyong we were working on. And then it might be that we just want to do push-ups together, like, 100 push-ups 5 times a day, and see if we can get ourselves to the point where we can do some of these forms and have more core strength and are able to, to handle ourselves better. And I don't know why I'm energized by this conversation, but I certainly am. The time I've spent with my grandkids, I think they've woken something up inside of me, and I really, I'm glad we're having the chat. So
that's been what I've been working on for 30 years. It's just, how do you, help people refine their ability to learn, and how do you create, systems that allow people to learn in a way that will be supportive of who they're choosing to be as they move through the various stages of their life, and it's complex. It's it is very complex because it's such a human-based thing, and we're all so different, in so many ways. So finding that, it's the scale thing, like one-on-one, not it's one thing, but just thinking it through at scale is just fascinating me, unraveling that knot.
Yeah. So I know we could go on with this line of thinking all day long, but I had to make a choice early on when I started doing consulting, and when I started doing computer type stuff at scale. I realized that I could make desktop units in a large quantity and probably make somewhere around 25% gross profit margin on all of them. And I could sit down and I could do the math, and that would tell me what size business I would have, how many people would be assembling, testing, and all the rest of that sort of thing, installing, training, and what have you. Or I could shift my focus to being the best service provider and having people buy their equipment someplace else, and then take on large organizations and help them through the processes and all the things that we're talking about, the things that they don't know with regard to firewalls and security and, just policies and procedures and what have you. And the numbers looked really awesome to me, and I was pretty sure I couldn't do it when I first decided to take on larger businesses. They're now going to expect more from me. And it's the same kind of a thing for a teacher. As Anthony Robbins went along, he started off and everyone could buy the 30-day, Awaken the Giant Within and all the rest of that sort of thing for $79.95 or whatever it was. And then before you know it, you're going to Fiji with him for a week, and that's $10,000 for the first weekend. So in terms of the scale part of it, I think he found it more rewarding working with rich people than he did with masses of people that could only afford $79.99. Although he's gone back there several times throughout his career, including now. I think he does an awful lot of mass stuff to build the farm. But anyhow, Jan, thank you very much for allowing me to just drone on. I appreciate that. And anything else to say, guys, to kind of wrap this up?
Well, I'm good.
No, this was fun.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you. And I'm going to leave you the same way that I always do, and that is to request that you go out, let somebody in your life know that you're really glad that they're here. Text, phone call, email, knock on their door, whatever it takes, but please let somebody know that your world works because they're here. And in the meantime, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. Thank you very much, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.